Welcome to Blood, Sweat and Talanoa. This is another BST Blitz, and today I've got with me Ta'ala Shane Ta'ala for lover Shane.
It's a lot for love, Shane. Yeah, good to see you.
This is going to be one of those Shane conversations.
It's a bit like when we worked at Stats NZ, it was like that, Shane
I
and Shane.
reckon. Oh, now the special thing of today is that you are in Tom Pryce in Western Australia. Tell us about how you ended up some way up there.
Oh yeah, and I guess the first thing for a lot of people, no one knows where Tom Price is when I'm talking to people in New Zealand. And so Tom Price is in Western Australia. A lot of people think I live in the Perth area, but Tom Price is a mining town in the Australian Pilbara outback, and it's about 17 hours drive northeast of Perth. And so it's pretty fun for Terry and I, my wife, because we do enjoy that drive. Often we drive because we've got to pick up stuff and bring it up. But that equates to about a 2.5 hour flight usually
Yeah,
between Perth and Paraburdoo. So we have no airport here at Tom Price, but the nearest airport, domestic terminal, is about an hour's drive from here at another township called Paraburdoo. That's another mining town. Um, but the interesting thing is there's a lot of Rio Tinto mining camps and BHP mining camps in the area, and they have their own airports at the camp, and so they have Qantas flights that fly direct just with mining staff. So, even though we're an outback town, it's quite busy up in the air. You do
yeah.
get to see quite a yeah.
Now you're closer to Bali than you are to Perth. Is that true?
I think so, eh? It must be because so many FIFO staff, like it's fly in, fly out staff that I work with, when they have their off swing from working here in the mining sector, they tend to go to Thailand or to the Philippines. And then, yeah, so they FIFO from Thailand, Philippines. Some of the truck drivers I work with, they do that. So it's really unusual. But
Now, why did you just get the thought to head up to that part of the world?
yeah, well, it's one of those things, eh? In life, like when I look back on my life, I can't really say that I planned much at all. Things happened and opportunities happened. But yeah, Shane, you and I, we worked at Stats NZ. That's kind of where we really met, is at Stats NZ. And I'd only been there 3.5 years, but I loved that job. And all my kids always were telling their mum, Dad's never going to leave his job. And the reason that came up is because in Tom Price, my eldest boy, he works for Rio Tinto Mining. And so him and my daughter-in-law and our 4 grandchildren, they live here. And so we were one of that generation of grandparents that were living a virtual relationship with our grandkids. And so, yeah, my Terry, she just said, look, I'm missing out on my grandkids. I'm going to move over to Tom Price, so you can come if you want. And it's like, yeah, not much of a choice when you think, Terry and I, we've been together since 1987. And so, yeah, so it was a tough thing for me to do, like, because I love what I do for a job and I love the career that I had. But the biggest thing I've learned since doing that, because it was hard to do, was now I look back and I realize, man, I gave up something great for something better. Um, and that doesn't change the fact that what I had at Stats and when I worked at Auckland Council, that wasn't so great. That's not the case. It's just it was a great life, but without my grandkids. Um, things have really changed. So that's why we're here in Tom Price. The only challenges is when you live in the Pilbara in the Australia outback, the types of jobs that you and I are familiar with in the public service or in strategic planning, operations management, all that kind of, or systems design architecture stuff for organizations. Those roles do not exist out here in the Pilbara, and so it's like, yeah. So that's basically how we ended up here.
Yeah.
Is
Now
yeah,
you're a
about
city
grandkids.
boy from the big smoke and Okalani and that. What's been some of the transition in terms of difference, like you talk about, jobs and stuff like that. Are there any other things that have been sort of part of that transition and point of difference?
Yeah, like one of the things I loved about my job, like, that I left at Stats, was I was pretty much working in 3 cities, right, every week. Um, and it was no secret that it was normal for me to pull 71 hours a week plus, it's like, but that's because I loved what I was doing. It was pretty cool work. But you're in 3 cities a week, right? So you're always in cities, and you're always around food. So that was one of the challenges I had, is when in the last probably 18 months of my job, I put on like I was 118 kgs. Um, yes, and I think one of the biggest challenges because of all the food. Like New Zealand, now that I've left, man, New Zealand is amazing. Like in Auckland, Wellington, especially for food, the cafe culture, like our caliber of food, it doesn't just look good. The taste is multi-layered, man. Like I say this now because when I'm in Australia, Melbourne's probably the closest place I've had that I can say, man, this food is good, like what I'm used to in New Zealand. Perth is all right, lots of food choices, but the problem is it looks good, like really. But then I'm expecting the same kind of taste, flavors, and layers that I get in New Zealand. And yes, they're not. But then just think, I'm in Tom Pryce now. There's one restaurant here, and this is the Pilbara Outback. So I'm not even going to talk about the quality of the food out here. But the great thing about where I live is there's nowhere to spend money, and there's no. I'm not eating at restaurants anymore, So it had a huge impact. Oh, plus the heat. So our summer, when I started work um, in this sector, uh, I started work. I was still 118 kgs. Within 3 weeks, I dropped to about 111 of just working. I hadn't done a physical job since the early 90s, but it's the heat. So you're working in 44-degree heat, and it's that dry thing. So yeah, I was real lucky because before I walked in off the street because we'd moved here to Tom Pryce, and it was really cool at Stats because they continued to employ myself from here for right up until for another 6 to 7 months, and so I was working from home on New Zealand hours, but I wasn't doing anything physical still. But when I finished at Stats and realized, man, I have to get a job here, and I walked in off the street. What I did is when I got this job working at it's a heavy machinery leasing company to all the mining sector out here.
Mm.
I thought, so Terry and I, we decided to start walking in peak heat um, at around 2 p.m. all around the outback out here, and just to climatize, because I thought, man, I'm going to start work with these mechanics and these tradies who are just going to laugh at me, like this old man trying to pretend he can actually still do some physical functional work. And so that's what I thought. And I thought, man, I'm going to die in the heat, so I better get used to it. So every day for about a week, 2 weeks before I started work, we were out in this heat. What I didn't realize is when I did start work, and they're mostly all young guys, right? Because I'm 55. They're all young guys, these mechanics. So I'm the oldest person on the yard with the lowest job in the company, as I'm a trade assistant. And but what was amazing was I didn't realize they're all FIFO workers. So they fly in, fly out. So what it means is they do 2 weeks here and then fly home for a week and then come back. Yeah, and some of them do 3 weeks on and 1 week off. Um, but what was interesting is when I started work, those guys never climatized to the heat here because they go back to Perth and then they're back in that 24-degree heat. It's 19 to 24. Yeah, so what was interesting is I built up this heat resilience. So it was good because they could see I could actually last a day. What they didn't realize, I was dying inside the whole time. I couldn't show it, because and also it was the first time I've worked in a heavily male-dominated sector environment,
Mm.
and when you look at the spaces that you and I have come from, where we worked, is it really gave me an appreciation of what it means to work in a place where there's a high proportion of women, in the place. Like I just didn't realize the impact it had on how I work, how I think, um, the different intellectual curiosity that we have. Because I work in a sector where if you think it's not welcome, it's like it's very male. It's all about the what and the how,
Mm.
and but it's been amazing. Like um, I've really enjoyed it. I got to be honest, it was hugely challenging because in my first week of arriving here, and because I was stressed and living in denial, I didn't realize it. And I was stressed because I was still working for stats, still doing all those, like the federated data ecosystem, that high complexity stuff. And I was doing it even while transitioning to Tom Pryce. So I didn't realize how stressed I was. I did something silly and cut my hand, but it was deep enough where I had to go to the hospital here. Hospital. It's a bit of a what they call a hospital, and But when the doctor took my blood pressure, he says, "Mate, your blood pressure is through the roof." Like it
What
was.
was it? What was it?
Oh man, I can't remember what it was, but it was enough where he said, yeah, they had to do some things, and he said, you need to you need to start handling this. You need to start taking control. And what it was, I think, it was triggered because of my stress of that transition,
Mm,
and not real, just not as a man being stupid, not making the plan that you're actually completely going into an alien environment where you don't know what you don't know. Everything that's been normal to in your life is now not there, and you have to. And people don't realize out here you're so far away, and a lot of the roads are four-wheel drive only dirt roads. So there's a whole lot of learning you have to do, and a lot of investment you've got to put into. You can't just go buy a normal car. So we
mm.
bought a four-wheel drive, spent like 40,000+, but only to find that I had this Mitsubishi Pajero, um, but then I had to spend another 12 grand to get it up to Pilbara spec where we live. Like, just so that if you go out, you're not stupid and you end up, because something happens, then yeah. And it's interesting because in my first 6 months we were at a fatality because we were second on scene to
Whoa.
quite a large accident. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, but that's the thing when you come out here. A lot of people that come here that haven't understood that, um, either find out the hard way or they realize that you actually have to invest in knowing and understanding how to do. Like, for example, that car crash that we came across is second on scene between Panawanaka and Tom Pryce. It took the ambulance about 3 hours to get there, and there's no signal. And it was only by chance someone showed up with a sat phone. And
Yeah.
even with a sat phone, you can't barely get signal. But it was an Aboriginal family as well, and so yeah. And but no, just it really hit home to Terry and I that we're not. Yeah, we're not in we're not in Auckland anymore. It's like, but it's just the amount you have to learn and you have to invest. And I was lucky because I did do about 7 years of urban search and rescue with civil defence. Like, I've done quite a lot of training, but also deployments to earthquake zones. So that resilience was there, but
Yeah.
having to live in that kind of environment 24/7 was an adjustment.
Adjustment. Well, look, I'll get back to you. You said in terms of, you're 118. What are you now?
Yes, I'm 106 kgs now, and it's yeah. But my family, I didn't when I started losing weight when I started the job, I didn't notice
Mm,
because you don't see yourself, right? But people like months later would say to me, like my nephew and his partner, they moved here too, and they both work. Well, one of them works at Rio Tinto as well, but they were saying, "Oh man, like when you started at that place, we noticed within 3 weeks that you just shedding weight, and um, yeah, and I think also because I do have a fast metabolism, even though you wouldn't have noticed that when I was at Stats,
I
'cause
do notice that.
yeah, but no, the thing is, there's so much money in the mining sector that people
Mm,
and Rio Tinto subsidizes all their medical. So a
yeah.
lot of the miners go and they get that stomach staple or that stomach wrap. But yeah, it was funny because some people here with Rio that I'm friends with were joking saying, "Mate, you got the stomach staple and we didn't even know that you're gone." Because just the
Natural.
speed of yeah, but yeah, I only dropped to like I think 111 after 3 weeks. It was quite rapid, but then because now I've my your physical capability to do the job goes up. You don't even realize because you're just trying to, and plus a mental state. Like, and bear in mind this whole time, man, I've come into a sector that is highly toxic, very dysfunctional. Um, didn't understand planning, and yet they have this high churn of machines that we have to work on to get out. And
And they're
yeah,
pretty big too, eh?
oh,
They're
they're
quite,
huge.
they're
Yeah,
huge.
they're huge machines. So yeah, there's so much to learn, and I think that's what was so good for me is that when I was working at Stats, already know most stuff. You're living in an environment you're familiar with. These challenges, but man, they're not challenges like what I had to. Like coming here at the age of 55 and then having to be a young man again, basically, and working in a toxic environment, and really coming to understand the nature of men. Like, when left to their own devices, it's like far out. Like, and
Well,
yeah, so.
Shane, tell us about that nature. Look, there's some stuff like we'll dive into that, but just in terms of that, because one, you sort of felt like a bit of a fish out of water, but I think from the conversations we had, you were able to apply some of your expertise in that to that working environment of working around all those guys and that machinery. Take us through what you
Yeah,
did.
so it's it's real. It's interesting, because like you're coming into a space that belongs to other people,
Mm,
and it's a space that you haven't been in for like, how long, right? Like there was a time I did do physical work on farms, but that was like when I was like 17 to 21, right? And it's fittest I've ever felt in my life. But yeah, coming into this and coming from where we've come, and is real interesting because all I heard was a lot. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of argument, lots of and man, over here they take their form of verbal abuse and swearing is at another level, and I found it hugely entertaining, sure. But but the interesting thing was, while listening in it, I either had a choice as a man. I had a choice. I either participate in it and just do what everyone else does, which is vent, or I can just shut up and listen and try to understand what is the source of all these men's frustrations. And
mm,
it wasn't just men on the yard where I worked with. It was, I've got trucks, different truck companies showing up every day, like 4 to 6 times a day, to pick up these heavy machines. So you get to know the truck drivers too. And the amount of truck drivers that are aged like 65 and still working. And it wasn't me that thought it, but one of the apprentices said to me, "Man, if you're that age and still doing this, something went wrong in your life." And sure enough, most truck drivers I talk to, the first thing I hear come out of their mouth is, "She took everything." And they're talking about their divorces, and then as I listen more and more, I realize, wow, there's something that happens in relationships where intimacy is no longer a part of the relationship. And men live these different lives in this different world, and there's no crossover. There's no real sharing, and it's like they don't know how to. Yeah, it loses those sensitivity. So what a lot of stuff I used to hear, like from the first week, was a lot of racist stuff, a lot of sexist stuff. Like, yeah, and see, for people like us who have come from where we've come from, man, that's just, yeah. So what's really interesting, is that when they used to ask me, "Oh, well, like, what did you do before you come here?" Well, how am I going to explain
how
that
you
to them, eh?
explain that?
So I
Yeah.
did. So I like they'd ask, what did you do before you came? And I try to explain, and then some of them will go, "What is that? Like, what's your job title then?" Like, and I says, "Oh, well, the last role I had was an intercultural systems design architect, right?" But see, by then, rather than laugh and mock, they listen, because by then
Mm,
that was like 2 weeks in. They'd seen that I know how to shut up and just hit the job, and that's it, like, yeah, and I know how to focus on the job and not the issue so much. And the other thing I had was, well, I don't really care. Like and we do 12-hour days. So you start at 6 a.m. and you finish at 6 p.m.
it's a long
I'm on
day.
5 days a week. Those
Uh,
guys who are on FIFO, they work every day for like 2 weeks. So they don't have breaks. And yeah, so when you're doing that kind of yeah, those hours, for me it was like, well, I don't really care. Like, I got 12 hours to fill in a day. I don't care what I do, so I'm not attached. But what was interesting was I started to understand within 3 weeks the source of their toxicity, all that, because this is stuff we do under like shared design modeling, all that kind of stuff. So what was neat is I was able to apply what I do as a job in New Zealand in this toxic man space. What was interesting is, like, a lot of them would be attacking the branch manager, and then I'd hear another one go, "Well, we can't do anything about it because he's the boss. What he says goes, even if he's wrong." But then I just said to them 3 weeks after starting was, "Yeah, but he's only one guy. There's six of us." So what I started showing them is, and I also started telling them, "I don't know why you're trying to change him. Like, you're never going to be able to change him. So don't bother. Don't make that the focus of your day. We should start looking at what are things we can do throughout the day that actually help us increase so yeah, so I ended up cutting it short. I ended up developing a system structure process for the branch. But what was crazy, it was all populated with all the shit I'd heard from these guys. And so because they saw themselves in what I put up on the whiteboard, we redesigned this thing. It didn't worry about the manager, like, Yeah, because they have managers, foremen, leading hands. They're not trained on how to manage. They've just been there a long time. They're really good at mechanical things. But then they get made a foreman or something, but they don't know how to lead. They don't know how to plan. They don't know how to do operations plans. Whereas you, man, that's our bread and butter. So that was one of my secret weapons is, oh, I know how to write. I can articulate all your stuff onto paper. I can weaponize, things. And, and you know what ended up happening is we trialed this for 3 weeks. It actually resulted in containing and stabilizing our operations. All of a sudden, the foreman at the time, because we got a new one now, all of a sudden he started following. So what I learned was if we grow a culture within our team,
Mm.
and there's a loyalty to each other, and there's a purpose and a vision behind what we do. At the end of each day, what I noticed is at the end of each day when we finish around 6 o'clock to clock out, they all had a sense of achievement because they looked back at what they did. And what they were happy about is they were able to achieve, in spite of the manager, what they set out as a goal in the morning in our pre-starts. So something started to happen. All of a sudden, it built a culture of unity. And when things went wrong, it was down tools, everyone focused on where the need is greatest. So I started teaching them all the stuff that came out of the Auckland plan, like different wording and terminology. What was amazing was that within 2 months, it had changed our stat reporting figures for the branch. Anyway, I'll fast track you to now. We're now the high performing leading branch in our region in Western Australia. There's 12 branches in Western Australia. They're all toxic because they're all filled with men who don't know how to talk, who don't know how to understand and articulate why they're angry. So what's neat in our branch is that you don't hear any venting anymore. People look at how they deal with things. Yeah, like there's no fighting, and not only that, the new foreman, like he makes us all lunch every day. So what happens is all of a sudden we now all eat together. And we've had a few carver sessions. So I love my carver. So we've had a
Yes.
few carver sessions, and yeah, it's been. But what's really interesting is the operations manager. Yeah, it's really cool to see that now these men now know how to, because they're learning to control themselves. And what they've learned from how we work together is if you can control yourself, you have the ability to control others by creating spaces that allow us to have a voice, but results in the change of an environment.
Mm.
The environment. See, it's funny because all these guys now say they saw how change the form, change the branch manager, and
Foreman.
complied. So yeah,
Now,
so
one
it's
of the amazing things of this, but I'm not amazed because I know you, is that you didn't define it by you talked about a hierarchy and roles. You were in one of the more sort of junior roles on that yard,
oh yeah.
but was able to sort of have that influence across that team and also for the better.
Yeah. It's and I think that's what's really good about, we talk about management and leadership, but what I like is when I think of Te Ao Lewa, when I think of Te Ao Marama, um, and for those that don't know, when I
Yeah,
look at
talk
Te
to
Ao
us a little bit
Māori,
about that.
yeah, so because I've worked very much, a lot of my work's been in the Te Ao Māori space, with iwi, hapu, mana whenua, and yeah, so the thing is, when I look at Te Ao Māori as a public servant, when I've worked in Te Ao Māori, what I've realised is, and I've realised it because it's been shared with me from other tohunga, Māori tohunga. So it's people like Reriata Mākiha, Hoturo Kerr, Bernard Makoari, you know, and Manuki Hinari. Like there's lots of people that I've been able to work with that have left a lasting impression. And Morven Simon's a key person in my upbringing as well, from Kawaik, from Ngā Pairangi on the Wanganui River. But the thing is that what I've realised through those different kōrero and wānanga with people who are knowledge holders is that this context of Te Ao Māori from a government perspective, it's still a colonized construct for a number of reasons. And when I look at Te Ao Māori, and Pākehā always say, oh, Te Ao Māori, I understand as a Māori worldview. But the question for me is, yeah, but which Māori? Because there's no singular context of, that's why I look at intracultural context, not just intercultural. So there's a difference. And
Mm.
so as an example, intercultural is working between Pākehā and Māori, or even Samoan or Tongan. That's an intercultural context. But to me, from an Indigenous perspective, intracultural is when you're working within the different layers and groups within a culture. So if I look at Māori, you've got iwi, hapu, hokainga, mana whenua, and all these different contexts of existence all have a context that still binds them together through whakapapa, but depending on what you're wanting as a discussion point with Māori in a particular area, that will determine which group you're going to talk with. It's also part of what went so horribly wrong with uhumatao, within Māngere. I mean, that's a real good example is, I think we did this with different Crown agencies that we worked with, is it was just saying to them, well, when you look at uhumatao, who's the iwi for uhumatao? And so that's Waikato Tainui. And then the question was, well, who's the hapu? Well, it's controversial, but like there's Te Akitai who are recognised because they've gone for treaty settlement, around Ihumatao and that area. But also there's Te Ahiwaru, which is their cousin hapu, who are also, so, there's almost two. But we were only, when I was at Auckland Council, we were only sort of designated with Te Akitai for that from a mana whenua context to a degree. But then if you say, well, who's the mana whenua for Ihumatao? And that's Te Kawarewa Maki up on Bethel's Beach. And then the next point is, okay, so who's the Hokainga? Well, that would be Makoto Marae, who was there in that area. But they're Te Ahiwaru. So if you look at the hyper complexity around that, if you apply a white Pākehā lens to that terrain, you're going to get it wrong because it's linear. And so what we had to do from a design perspective is understand and develop what's a shared design but a lateral context, an indigenous intellect model that you would use in that kind of context environment. And the one that we had to use was a divergent intellect model, which is really challenging because if you look at academia, that's all based on a convergent intellect model. So look, I'm not going to go into that, right? And some people might think, "Fuck, that's right over my head," but just to let you know, that's the nature of the job that I had, was how to work within and between the fabric of our society in relation to Te Ao Pākehā, Te Ao Māori, Te Ao Marama. And the reason I look at Te Ao Marama is a pre-colonization context worldview from a Māori context perspective of things. And so when I'm doing work in Māoritanga or Māoridom, I tend to always try to have the right space that's built around a Te Ao Marama context. Because that's a realm space. Whereas for me, when I work in the role that I've left, the Te Ao Māori space is a domain context that should be informed by a Te Ao Marama anchor.
Well, you've also got a really unique perspective on this because one, you're Samoan, raised in Wanganui, and also working across those spaces. And you've also, even in your time in Australia, have been sort of connected in terms of some of the indigenous native peoples there around some of their stuff. Just give us Shane, talk to us about sitting with the Whaksamoa sort of concept, and then being able to work across those spaces. What and particularly interested in terms of points of difference between working with Indigenous people in New Zealand to potentially also the stuff that you've done in Australia.
Yeah, it's and I think when I talk about Te Ao Marama, one of the reasons, I'm biased too, the reason that I love the Te Ao Marama realm space is because what sits behind Te Ao Marama is Te Ao Lewa, is Te Wā. So that tangata whenua, tangata moana context is like, that's not made up, that's a whakapapa context. And what I like about Manuka Henare and the stuff he used to always remind me to model my thoughts and planning on when I'm working for Crown agencies, is he always spoke of mana tupuna, mana tangata, mana tamariki, right, as a domain to realm space context. And when I think about that, if I think mana tupuna from a Te Ao Māori perspective, that's only back to 1840, right? So Te Ao Māori as a context really is a Māori worldview only going back to 1840, and sort of connected with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And so if I look at that Te Ao Māori, that mana tupuna whakapapa context, that's not about Māori just back to when they arrived in Aotearoa. That mana tupuna context from a Te Ao Marama perspective is actually back to pre-arrival of Māori. And so, Ririata Makiha as a tohunga, he often says, well, when our tupuna arrived, this is from a Māori voice, not my voice, But what Ririata says is when Māori arrived in Aotearoa, they weren't Māori. He says we weren't Māori. We were of the moana, right? So that's why that whole realm space, kaupapa kōrero knowledge base from Te Ao Marama, it already has Te Ao Lewa anchored in. So when I look at my whakapapa in terms of as a Samoan, it's that's why when from a tauiwi perspective, be living in Aotearoa, being born and raised in Aotearoa as a Samoan, is that as a Samoan, I know that from our wha Samoa and our anganuu, when we live in this out in Aotearoa, we as a people have an obligation to our whanaunga Māori. So it's not just a nice to have. There's a deep, you can't do wha Samoa while in New Zealand and not have that understanding of that foundation obligation that we have to our cousins, to tangata whenua here. So for me, it's never been a clash. I've never had that issue. Even when I get challenged by, I've been in roles in government where I've been challenged by Māori around, like, why are you doing this? Because it's not your place to be doing that, and questioned around the stuff that we work. But like I've always said, my job is not to be Māori, because that's impossible. But my role that I've been employed by government is to create the right spaces that enable our treaty partners to be able to come in and actually help shape the future state at a system level. Whereas to date, all we've ever seen is Māori get engaged at a structural process level, but they're never allowed to actually joint hold the pen to reframe the system lens. Even today, you and I did that work where, yeah, it did create a space that allowed for certain things to come in. But all it did was allow us to redirect the kōrero around Te Tiritia of Waitangi away from the principles and focusing on the articles of the treaty, which is, black and white. So, and yeah.
Look, one of the other things I did wanted to sort of raise too is that you've got another perspective of working in local central government and being Pacific, being Samoan, working across the Te Ao Māori space as well. Talk to me about the because this is a concept that comes from yourself, is around that burden of explanation and burden of approval, particularly with your own identity and working in that that system structure sort of
Yeah,
frame.
I think that's the whole thing around the reality that we all grew up in a whaapalangi world, right? Like, and so what's great is that we do have um, a divergent lens that for not mainstream, white stream Pākehā in Australia and Aotearoa, they only have one view they can trade on, But the cool thing with us is we have multiple worldviews that we can bring to an equation, that we can bring to a debate, we can bring to a context. The challenge, though, is that we don't hold the pen around this reframing the definition of the debate. You see this with Seymour, right? Like, he's not wanting to have a debate. What he's really wanting is he wants to have a debate that is framed according to what they perceive as important and real and valued, which in itself was a breach of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Like, it's really interesting that no one asked for that bill, right? It just came from a very small pocket of interested group that's trying to push a particular perception. And their argument is that, well, Māori are trying to push a particular perception. But yeah, it's about divergent views. And I think that's the thing about the work that we've been involved in and having to work across the board is, for me, being anchored in who you are, but why you are. Not just who you are and what you are, but why you are, and going back in that space. And for me, I've been lucky because I've grown up in Wanganui. I grew up in a Pākehā society, right? Wanganui, man, there's not much divergence there. The Māoris back in the 70s weren't that visible, right? Different to how it is now. But the thing is that because of that upbringing, I had to find out pretty quick and fast, well, what am I? And who am I? And why am I? And from a young age, that was able to be populated with the help of growing up with Māori, actually, with the Te Tāna whānau and Apa Kawaik with in Ngā Paerangi. But the richness they gave me, because never at any time did they ever treat me ever as an other. And that's probably why I developed this lens. And it's challenging for a lot of people because when I'm working in this government space with a Māori role, right? Like, the word Māori right next to my job title, people don't know that whakapapa. And the hard thing for me is I never really felt it was my place either to say those things. So I never did, because for me, I got to operate in my own right, But the fact that I had that whakapapa, like, because the thing I love about Ka Waiki and Ngā Pairangi and the Titana whānau and Uncle Morv and Kura Simon is that they claimed me as one of their own. And that was made clear to me when I started working in Crown agencies. And I was sort of asked by Uncle Morv, saying, because I would often send him my work and say, oh, this is what's happening, this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm addressing it. And there were times he'd say, yeah, but I don't understand why you're not saying this. And then I had to explain to him one time, I said, oh, Uncle Morv, outside of Wanganui, outside of Kawaik, I'm Samoan. Like, I told him that if I was to do that in Auckland or in that Crown agency, I'm going to get eaten, and he wasn't happy about that because he said to me, no, you belong to us. He said, I don't care what other people say. Because I said to him, when I'm up there, I'm not, like you treat me that way and you claim me as my own, but man, when I'm up there, I'm not a ngā Pairangi rohi, like, and it's not my place to, yeah. So he made me accountable for some things, and he passed away too, and that's the thing, is that's why, Shane, you've seen me, man, when I'm in my government role and I'm getting shit from Māori. It's like, oh man, the reason I don't take it personally is because I know how they feel. But the thing is, the reason I can't back down is because of people like Uncle Morv, Manuki Henari, all those Māori and those Māori tohunga that I've worked with, is that if I back down, it's not about me. It's about who then carries the role to open the spaces to allow their taonga knowledge to come forward, in this space. And that's the other thing too, is like, because I do get heavily criticised sometimes that I don't have te reo Māori, but what I've highlighted to people is that, well, it's not my job to be Māori because I'm not. But I will give respect to the hapu that claim me, so I have obligations to them, and I'm not gonna compromise that either. But at the same time, I'm not a taonga knowledge holder. It's not my role to be that. But my role is to create the spaces where I can safely bring in tohunga into our Crown agency spaces to help shift the thinking of our Pākehā colleagues and our Pākehā partners. Because, I remember Leland Rufu saying back in 1998, along with Moore Strix and Pua, is even Leland used to say to me, we need more white people to carry and champion the voice of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and to advocate on our behalf with their own white people. And that's where I picked up on the burden of explanation. Because, Leland was saying, this knowledge that we have as practitioners in our Māori space, that cost us blood. That cost us as human beings, as people, to know that. And now we get employed by these agencies who just want to pay us money and say, right, cough up the shit. But it costs them nothing. They're not sacrificing anything to understand that knowledge, and therefore they're not investing in their relationship to know and understand the people. And that's the problem with Seymour, is that, given, like Seymour says, oh, he's Māori, so that's another interesting thing. And that's what I mean about intercultural. You can't deny that a person's Māori just because what they're saying doesn't, it offends you from a Māori context, because that whakapapa thing, right?
Yeah.
But we need to be able to create the spaces to have informed kōrero from both sides. Whereas right now, what they're trying to do is create a space where they can have kōrero that's only framed and informed from a white perspective.
Yeah, and a one-way conversation too.
Yeah,
not a dialogue, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Without ever addressing, that's the burden. So what happens is every time we work in a Crown space, if you're brown, you're going to be expected to carry the burden of explanation for brownness, for Māori, for Pacific, for tangata moana. You're going to be expected to carry the burden of reaction, the burden of response. And, as practitioners in those spaces, no one's ever been given the space to actually capture that, just explore and unpack it. Whereas, the only reason you and I had to do that, Shane, and Mary and Daisy, Maria and Daisy, is because we had to do that because we couldn't have the type of conversation required with the executive management team and with our CEO, coming from a deficit paradigm of a colonized construct. And that's actually why I had an issue with I still struggle using the word Pacifica, a colonizing name that was given to us. It didn't even come from us, but it raises the point about the treaty too. Like, I'm really excited to see Māori really championing the Te Tiriti o Waitangi. But what's interesting for me is that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is not a Māori document. Like it's a Crown government document. So it's really neat to see that Māori are unbiased enough to be pushing and championing a founding document that was developed, designed, and written by Pākehā, by the Crown, and it wasn't even translated by Māori, right? So
No, wasn't.
yeah, and
No.
the only thing that's Māori about it is they're the subject matter, and they were signatories to it, and it was signed at Waitangi. There's a lot to explore, and the principles are important. But the thing I don't like, and I'm happy to say it's just my opinion, but when the Crown was confronted with the fact that yes, there are two versions. There's an English version. Oh, I'm not even saying that it's a translation. It's not. There's an English version of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and there's a there's a Māori version of that our treaty partners, that Hapu signed. Well, I won't say iwi because iwi didn't exist at the time. It was Hapu who signed it. So when I look at those things, and there's the version that was signed. So when you look at contra preferentum through international court, right? So what they define and state through contra preferentum is that where there are two versions of a treaty between a colonizing power, an imperial power, and an indigenous people, it is the indigenous text that takes precedent, right? I mean, that makes sense, right? Because it's about non-disclosure. So they signed in good faith based on what was in the Māori version, not the English version. So what happens when the New Zealand government was confronted with that? They had to make a choice. A decision had to be made. Like, well, are we going to acknowledge that from the international court? Are we going to accept that the Māori version is the correct version because that's what they signed? The conditions and obligations. This is what we promised to Māori, right? But what the government at the time did is they said, oh, you know what? We're just going to give effect to both versions, right? And so by doing that, by giving effect to both versions, really they're not addressing the issue. And what they've done is they've created an environment where in perpetuity now, there will never be able to, it can't be black and white. There will never be able to, there will be ongoing debate around the two versions, right? And that's the source of the issue, is that until our country and our government is mature enough to accept those things, and it's not even from Māori that are saying that, it's international court. And so, yeah, we're always going to be in an industry of grievance, and everyone's going to blame Māori. But what I'm saying is, well, Māori aren't the source of the problem, right? So, yeah, but there's all these things like that. This is why they didn't focus on the articles of the treaty based on the Māori version, because it's clear, it's black and white. What I love about the Māori version and the articles of the treaty, it actually creates a space that enables tangata whenua to follow their kaua around manaakitanga of all other groups that come here. But when you follow the white version, it's conditional. It's a transactional process. It's not really relational, and it benefits and serves the interests, of the Crown, and so at the expense of its treaty partner. So, it's black and white, but until the government can make that decision to do the right thing for the right reason, and it's not about Pākehā Māori, it's just about the integrity of honouring a document and the spirit and intent. But yeah, I've had to stray away from the principles of the treaty, because to me the principles was in reaction to the fact that the Crown was never going to honour the articles of the treaty. But what I'm saying is the articles of the treaty are really black and white, and yeah, I prefer the articles. So
Hey,
yeah. Sorry, I've rambled on.
no, that's a good deep dive into this, and probably definitely one that we'll need to get you back and have a much more deeper dive on a number of these particular sort of things, bro. Yeah,
Yeah, well, especially from an Aboriginal context, because we
yeah,
arrived here when the referendum was on, right? The vote
yeah.
yes, and so that's a huge difference between the Indigenous peoples of Australia, Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal peoples, and Māori, is that Māori had a treaty, but there's a specific reason why Māori and Aotearoa had a treaty, and the Aboriginal peoples did not get one. But sometimes I just feel like there's actually a precedent whereby, through Privy Council, that there's an opportunity in the future where the Aboriginal peoples of Australia should be able to take it to the Privy Council to say, why is it that the First Nations people of Australia just across the waters were treated differently and got a treaty? And it wasn't set up as a precedent to provide a treaty for the people of this land as well. So that's the difference with Australia and New Zealand, is that the Crown in New Zealand, the New Zealand government, they're actually a colonial settler government, right? And simply on the basis that, well, Māori never seceded sovereignty, right? It was ka wanatanga, and
Mhm.
and people say, well, yeah. So I'll leave others to look into the history, look at He Waka in terms of the work that Manuki Hinari has kept it on that space as well. But if you look at the government in Australia, they're not a colonial settler government. They're an occupational government, because there has been no discussion around sovereignty. There has been, and that's what that referendum was about last year. It was simply just to have the Aboriginal and Torres Strait peoples acknowledged as the indigenous people in this country on their constitution, because right now they're not.
You're not.
So yeah,
Well,
so very different.
and look, this is why I was keen to talk to you as well, because one of the things that I found, and Shane, this is, real sort of tribute to yourself too, is just that we talk on BST, we talk about our well-being and what influences well-being in that. And one of the things I think you offer a real good perspective on is around that system, is that sometimes we look at some of the things around our well-being and very much localize it. And I think you offer a really good perspective in terms of contextual history, but then also the system itself, in terms of sometimes we don't see that system sort of operating, but it is impacting us every day in that as well. And this is where talking with yourself is a really good insight into sort of looking and getting a wider sort of lens on it.
Yeah, no, cool.
Yeah.
Um, oh, and I just remember too, Shane. Yeah, I didn't get a stomach staple from the earlier conversation. Um, yeah, what it was is just the work that I do from day to day, which I so thoroughly love and enjoy at the moment, operating the machines and stuff. And working in this environment in this heat, pretty much just smashed me down to 106 kgs. And what I'm concerned about, is
You're
that because
looking good.
I'm about to move into um, an executive officer role for a tribal corporation, an Aboriginal corporation. And what I'm worried about, is that I'm not going to be doing that physical work anymore. So I'm going to
Okay.
have to like invest in a gym or something. Like, yeah. So yeah,
Well, potentially where you may be situated, there's probably again restaurants and offer might not be on offer, so it might still sort of work out for you, bro.
yeah, it will be. Yeah. No, awesome.
Hey, look, I really appreciate sort of spending some time with you and touching on some of these particular areas, which I know you bring an expertise and a real good and great view over. Just before I sign off, one of the things too with this podcast is very Poirua biased. And one thing that I probably should have mentioned up front, you have a link to Poirua and you have a link to a very substantial family in Poirua as well, your cousins.
Oh yeah, yeah. So the my Ahoy family. Well, man, Porirua, I have a soft spot because I grew up in Wanganui. So most of my holidays growing up as a young kid were always down in Porirua at Cannons Creek. So, and I got to tell you, man, it was one of the most creative spaces for me when I used to go down and be with my cousins. So, yeah, the Ahoys, and I'm of the Ahoy whānau. Like there's Latia. Most people know Latia because she was deputy mayor, I think, of Porirua Council. But I was of the younger generation in terms of Stuart and Levy Ahoy. They were my compadres, and it's interesting because there's such a huge influence on my white self life because I grew up in Wanganui. Yeah, and so outside of growing up at Kawaik, they were my contrast of they were my Samoatanga, like the introduction to that. But yeah, Porirua is a special place for me, because of that, because that's where I saw our people in large numbers, and just seeing behind the face, but knowing of the power, the talent, and the spirituality of our people, man, like, and the richness of our culture. So yeah, Porirua means a lot of things to different people, but to me it means a different powerful thing, eh? So yeah,
Yeah,
big ups, man, to Porirua.
oh, and everyone knows the Ahoy family. Very, very, very famous family in Poirua. And Ta'ala, your Matai title from Popua in Savai
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. I think that took on a whole different thing for me when I went back to through that process as well, because for me that was the thing that hit me around Te Ao Māori, Te Ao Marama, and Te Ao Lewa, was actually being at our whenua, and yeah, and capturing. I mean, that was in 2012. I went back, but that became a huge driver for me, that things have to be bigger than about myself, and yeah, man, I've really loved that part of it. But that's how we bring all of ourselves to every role that we have, eh? So yeah, including working in a machinery operator's yard and on different mine sites at different times. So yeah,
I
awesome.
had no doubt you would work out and sort of, given the great work that you did at Stats, that you'd sort out that yard pretty quickly.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, I
It's
like it.
awesome. So Ta'ala, look, whawhataitele lava, really appreciate sort of our time. I'd love to be able to sort of carry on the conversation, particularly as I know you may get into some more work in that area, and particularly working with Indigenous people in Australia. So always welcome back, but really appreciate the time today.
Yeah, awesome. Nah, thanks, Shane. Yeah,
That's
have a good weekend too. All
great.
right.
And so, look, that's another BST Blitz, a little longer than ordinary, but because we've got Shane Ta'ala with us, it was always going to be a bit more of a conversation. So, really great in catching up, and we'll see everyone next time. Mate wa.
Cool.